everyone, welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us today because, well, we're going to tackle a topic that forms the very backbone of the internet. But honestly, it still trips almost everyone up at some point. You know the feeling. We've all been there. You launch a huge project, you send out the link, and suddenly the whole website crashes. It is incredibly frustrating, right? So today, we're going to completely demystify the often overwhelming and kind of confusing world of web infrastructure and hosting so that literally never happens to you again. Okay, let's dive into this because we really need to challenge a massive misconception right out of the gate. For years, web hosting has been sold to us as just, a place to park your website's files. People tend to think of it as basically renting a static digital filing cabinet or just a hard drive sitting up in the cloud. But as you're going to see today, thinking of hosting as just storage is exactly how you end up overpaying, or worse, watching your website crash when you need it the absolute most. Because modern web hosting is just so much more than a hard drive. By definition, it's a fully fledged engine. We're talking about the computing power, the active memory, the networking pipelines, and the security frameworks that actively process, run, and deliver your website or application to the world. It's a very active, highly dynamic infrastructure environment. So, to get us from confusion to absolute clarity, here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, the web hosting myth. Number 2, what happens in a click. Number 3, inside the engine room. Number 4, types of web hosting. And finally, number 5, how to choose your host. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the web hosting myth, storage versus infrastructure. Now, what's really interesting about this is how absolutely critical it is that we separate two things that are almost always bundled and sold together, domains and hosting. They are completely different beasts. Your domain is literally just a human-friendly address, like example.com. It relies on the domain name system, or DNS, to act as a directory. But registering a domain doesn't magically create a website. The hosting is the actual physical and virtual infrastructure that processes your code and serves the content. So you can own a domain without hosting, and you can totally have hosting without a domain. Which brings us to section 2, what happens in a click, from URL to web page. We've established what hosting is, but think about the rapid, behind-the-scenes journey that happens every single time someone types in an address. It's this incredible, complex choreography. First, a URL is entered. Then, the DNS resolves that domain name into a network address. After that, a secure TLS connection is established, which, by the way, is exactly why you see that little lock icon for HTTPS. From there, the server actually receives and processes the HTTP request. And finally, it sends the data back so your browser can build the page. And the crazy part, all of this heavy lifting happens in just a fraction of a second. So let's move into section 3, inside the engine room, hardware and resources. Let's look at what's actually doing all that heavy lifting. I love using a car metaphor here to explain what lives inside a server. First up, we have the CPU, the central processing unit. Think of this as your car's engine. The CPU is the core muscle doing the heavy computational lifting. It's what executes your application code, processes languages like PHP, and runs the really complex database operations required to build a web page on the fly. Next up is RAM, or random access memory. If the CPU is your engine, RAM is the transmission. It provides the temporary working memory for all those active processes and databases. And here's the kicker. If you don't have enough RAM, your processes will literally crash and your site is going to suffer massive slowdowns. And that means lost sales and frustrated visitors, honestly, no matter how good your engine is. And finally, we have storage, which is the trunk of the car. It holds all your persistent data. Your website files, application code, databases, and media. Now, having blazing fast NVMe SSD storage is fantastic for a trunk, but a big, fast trunk is never going to make your car go any faster if your engine and transmission are weak. And this perfectly explains why that hardware matters so much, especially when you compare a static workload to a dynamic workload. Think about a simple static blog. It mostly just serves pre-built files unchanged, so it's highly efficient. But then imagine a dynamic e-commerce store running something like WooCommerce. Checking inventory during a massive Black Friday sale requires it to generate responses completely on demand. It's constantly checking stock, processing user sessions, and querying databases. That kind of dynamic site needs a massive CPU and RAM engine to survive the surge, whereas a static site, it barely uses any compute power at all. Now that we understand workloads, let's look at section 4, the types of web hosting, finding your tier. And this brilliantly illustrates how navigating this spectrum of hosting options is really all about trade-offs. On a shared hosting model, you have very low control and a low management burden, which makes it a typical fit for a small static site. But as you move down to a virtual private server or a fully dedicated server, you gain massive control, but your management burden completely skyrockets. You're basically trading convenience for absolute power and isolation. Now, you might also hear this incredibly scary jargon term, serverless hosting. Let's defang that right now. Serverless doesn't actually mean servers have stopped existing. It just means that you, the customer, don't manage those individual servers directly. The host platform dynamically allocates the infrastructure for you right in response to requests. Think of it like your home utility bill. You only pay for the water you actually use, not the entire town's reservoir. It's incredibly elastic. But regardless of the tier you choose, you are absolutely going to see a very specific number plastered everywhere on marketing pages. 99.99%, the famous 4 nines of uptime. It sounds practically perfect, right? Well, we need a quick reality check about those marketing promises. Just listen to what these percentages actually translate to in reality. 99% uptime sounds like an A on a math test, but it actually means your site could be down for over 7.3 hours a month. And that's likely right when your biggest campaign launches. Even that super impressive 99.99% still allows for about 4.38 minutes of downtime a month, or 99.999%, which is 26 seconds. It is absolutely vital that you carefully read your provider's service level agreement to see exactly how they measure this, what downtime actually qualifies, and if scheduled maintenance is somehow excluded from those figures. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, How to Choose Your Host, a Practical Framework. Let's move to and see how this builds a solid defense against tricky marketing. You really must look past the word unlimited on bandwidth or storage, because marketing pages love to hide the true bottlenecks. The real restrictions on a dynamic website are almost always hidden limits on CPU time or PHP workers, which actually act a lot like the number of cashiers open at a grocery store. If you run out of open cashiers, a line forms and your site crashes. That is what takes you offline during a traffic spike, not your storage limit. Another incredibly critical distinction to make when buying hosting is between backups and redundancy. Please do not confuse these. Redundancy is extra infrastructure that keeps your site online if a physical hardware server fails. But if your database gets corrupted or hacked, redundancy will faithfully and instantly replicate that corrupted data across your entire network. That is exactly why you always need independent, recoverable historical backups to actually restore lost data. So, the crucial point is this. When you are evaluating a host, skip picking by price alone. Here are the essential, empowering questions you have to ask. What is the workload compatibility? Who handles the security patching? Where does their responsibility end and mine begin? What is the actual backup scope? And importantly, how hard is it to pack up my data and migrate later if this just doesn't work out? As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Take a really hard look at your own website right now. Is your current hosting infrastructure actually built with the engine, the transmission, and the active memory to handle your ambitions and your traffic? Or are you just renting a digital filing cabinet? Understanding the difference is the absolute first step to truly mastering your web presence. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.